Hey, the fire's going now. Come a little closer. Find a comfy spot. Maybe lie back if you like. Feel that cozy warmth. All right, let's begin our story. Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a journey into the ancient world of Egypt, where the air was thick with something more than just heat and sand. Imagine walking through the bustling streets of Thebes or Alexandria, your senses overwhelmed by the rich, heady aroma of incense, crushed herbs, and mysterious resins. But these weren't just any smells. To the Egyptians, perfume was sacred, almost magical. It wasn't simply about smelling good. It was about connecting with the divine sealing deals, and sometimes even casting spells. Now here's a little reality check. You probably won't survive a day in ancient Egypt, especially with all the scorching, sun-bizarre beauty rituals and, well, let's just say you won't be loving the idea of wearing perfume made from animal fat and plant sap. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to know where you're listening from. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Perfume wasn't just a luxury for the pharaohs in ancient Egypt. It was a part of life woven into their culture, religion, and even their trade. This obsession with scent was so deeply embedded in their daily existence that they spent years crafting the finest, most intoxicating perfumes. Think about that, years. That's not just a hobby. It's practically an obsession, one that was so integral to their world that even the gods had their signature scents. Perfume was power mystery and a direct line to the divine. So let's start with how this all began. The Egyptians didn't just wear perfume, they believed in it. They believed that scent was a gift from the gods, a tool for connecting with the divine, and even a form of magic. Egyptians, with their impressive ability to craft oils and fragrances, understood something that we've all felt at some point. Certain smells can transport you, shift your mood, or even make you feel powerful. Historians still argue whether perfume was primarily for personal use or if it had a more ritualistic purpose. But one thing is clear, it was a central part of their daily life. In fact, Egyptians were among the first to mix flowers, herbs, spices, and resins into aromatic concoctions, paving the way for all the scents we take for granted today. But they weren't just picking flowers in their gardens. No. They were trading for rare and exotic materials that would allow them to create the most complex and luxurious fragrances. And these weren't just perfumes in the sense of modern-day sprays. These were oils, balms, and unctions designed for the skin, hair, and even for use in religious rituals. It wasn't all about making you smell good either. These perfumes, oils, and balms were seen as ways to protect your soul. The Egyptians believed that the gods themselves smelled of incense and sweet oils. Think of it this way: wearing perfume was like carrying a piece of the divine with you. Historians debate whether perfume played a larger role in their religious practices, or if it was more about class and luxury. But what is undeniable is that scent was a tool for both. You could smell like a god, or at the very least, you could stand next to someone who did. As you begin to imagine the importance of scent in Egypt, let's venture a little deeper into how they sourced these intoxicating perfumes. The Egyptians weren't exactly popping down to the local market for a bottle of lavender oil. No, to get their hands on the finest ingredients, they had to trade with far-flung lands stretching from the incense-laden mountains of the Arabian Peninsula to the lush rainforests of sub-Saharan Africa. You see, perfume wasn't just an Egyptian invention. It was the result of centuries of trade between cultures, each offering something unique to the aromatic pot. You may be surprised to learn that some of the most important perfume ingredients were actually resins and gums collected from trees found in faraway places. Take frankincense, for instance. This sweet resinous scent came from trees in the Horn of Africa, and it was used for religious purposes, offered up as a gift to the gods. The Egyptians valued frankincense so highly that it was burned in the temples to honor the gods, filling the air with an otherworldly fragrance. But it wasn't just for religious rituals. These precious resins also made their way into personal perfumes, offering both spiritual significance and an undeniable luxury. But Egypt didn't stop there. The perfume trade also involved materials from India, where cinnamon and myrrh were harvested. Myrrh, for instance, was used in embalming and had a sacred connotation. It wasn't uncommon for Egyptians to mix myrrh with other ingredients to create rich aromatic oils for anointing their bodies. This wasn't just about smelling good. It was about protection, spiritual connection, and health. Perfume was essentially an investment in immortality. Historians still argue about how widespread Egypt's trade networks were at the time, but there's evidence that these trade routes were far-reaching, and the impact of these fragrances extended beyond Egypt. The idea of scent as a spiritual and medicinal tool spread throughout the ancient world, reaching Mesopotamia, Greece, and even the Roman Empire. But the Egyptians were pioneers, laying the groundwork for a perfume industry that would only grow more complex and valued with time. Now, this obsession with scent wasn't just a luxury for the elite. You might imagine the pharaohs and their courts draped in fragrances, but the common folk weren't excluded. While they didn't have access to the most expensive oils and resins, they still relied on basic perfumes for their daily rituals. Local markets would have been filled with sellers offering simpler, more affordable versions of the royal concoctions. These everyday fragrances would have been made with local flowers, herbs, and oils, perhaps mixed with honey or vegetable oils to create a more modest version of the divine scents. Still, you might wonder, how did they even make these perfumes? The process was far more intricate than simply adding oils to a bottle. The Egyptians were masters at extracting oils from plants using a method called maceration, where flowers, herbs, and resins were soaked in oils or fats to extract their essential oils. This was a painstaking process, often taking days, if not weeks, depending on the substance. But it wasn't just about extraction, it was about blending. Perfume was art chemistry and magic all rolled into one. The goal wasn't just to make something that smelled good, it was to make something that could connect the wearer to the gods themselves. Now, let's shift gears a bit. You might have imagined that perfume in ancient Egypt was reserved for the rich and powerful like the pharaohs and high priests, but it was actually an essential part of religious life for all Egyptians. To them, scent was more than luxury. It was an offering a gift to the gods, an essential part of their daily worship. It's fascinating how much power these seemingly simple scents held in ancient rituals, especially considering the role of priests and temples in Egyptian society. The temples of Egypt were more than just religious spaces, they were the epicenters of society, politics, and culture. Priests would burn incense and anoint sacred statues of gods with perfumed oils to create an atmosphere of purity and reverence. Imagine the air thick with frankincense and myrrh rising in clouds as offerings to the deities. These weren't just pleasant aromas. They were considered to have the power to invite the gods down to earth. Scent, in this sense, was like an invisible bridge between the mortal and divine worlds. Historians still debate whether scent in religious rituals was a universal experience in ancient Egypt or if it was more localized to specific temples, but evidence shows that temples were often designed to amplify the effect of the incense. The architecture of these sacred spaces was built with the understanding that fragrance would fill every corner. Priests might have used large open courtyards or incense burners that allowed the aroma to fill the air, creating a powerful and immersive spiritual experience. Even the statues of gods were often coated with oils and perfumes, making them not just visual representations, but tactile sensory encounters with the divine. Perfume, though, wasn't just for religious ceremonies. It played a role in the lives of everyday Egyptians, too, especially during festivals and important occasions, weddings. Births and funerals were all moments where perfume was used to mark the occasion. It wasn't just about ritual, though. The act of wearing perfume became a social statement. Much like how we use fragrances today to express our personality or status, the Egyptians used perfume to communicate wealth, power, and prestige. One of the more interesting things about these rituals was the use of scent in the mummification process. The Egyptians believed that the body needed to be preserved for the afterlife, so they would cover the deceased in oils and resins, making sure the scent remained for eternity. Think about it, the idea of scent being part of the afterlife. It was thought that the gods could smell the perfume and be pleased, aiding in the soul's journey to the next world. Perfumed oils were also used on the linens that wrapped around the mummies. So, in a way, the Egyptians were preparing their dead for an eternity of divine favor by ensuring they smelled just right. This intertwining of scent with spirituality may seem strange, but it wasn't limited to Egypt. Scents were deeply embedded in the religious practices of other ancient civilizations as well, though Egypt's role in pioneering the use of fragrance in both daily and spiritual life cannot be overstated. Perfume in Egypt was an offering, a form of communication with the divine, and a way to mark significant moments in life and death. Now you might think about how we use perfumes today mostly as a fashion accessory or a personal preference, and wonder how the Egyptians felt about their creations. They didn't just wear fragrance for themselves. They wore it as a way of being in the world, expressing their devotion to the gods, their status, and their culture. And as much as you might think of perfume as just a bit of luxury in ancient Egypt, it was so much more. It was a vital part of life, linking the spiritual and the mundane, the powerful and the common. As we continue to explore the profound role of perfume in ancient Egypt, let's dive deeper into some of the actual recipes and concoctions that were used. You might imagine that making perfume in those days was all about combining a few flowers and oils. But oh no, Egyptian perfume crafting was an art of meticulous, precise preparation. The creation of a single batch could take months, even years, and it required not just patience, but a deep understanding of chemistry, botany, and alchemy. Imagine, if you will, an Egyptian perfumer's workshop. The air is thick with the scent of resins and oils, the floor scattered with clay pots and small jars, each filled with a different aromatic substance. There would be incense burners gently releasing clouds of smoke, infusing the room with an ever-changing mixture of fragrances. The ancient perfumers weren't just blending random ingredients together. They were following strict recipes passed down through generations. Recipes that were as much about the spiritual power of scent as they were about the art of perfume making. And while you might be used to modern perfumes in a sleek bottle, these ancient creations were often stored in carefully designed alabaster or ceramic containers, sometimes with elaborate lids designed to preserve the fragrance. One of the most famous scents was kifi, a kind of sacred incense that was used in religious rituals and as a general-purpose fragrance. Kifi wasn't just one scent, but a complex blend of ingredients including wine honey resins and various herbs. The process of making kifi was laborious. The Egyptians would mix the ingredients, then ferment them over weeks or even months to develop the full rich fragrance. It's said that kifi had an intoxicating effect when burned, which, considering its religious use, may have been intended to induce a trance-like state for worshippers or priests. This wasn't a simple perfume. It was a powerful tool for spiritual connection. Historians still argue over whether kifi had a single standardized recipe or whether it was adjusted based on the preferences of the individual temple or the purpose of the ceremony. Some believe that the fragrance was meant to symbolize the soul of the deceased in the afterlife, while others argue that it was primarily an offering to the gods during rituals. Whatever the case, kifi was just one example of how perfume wasn't just about pleasing the nose. It was about shaping experiences, both physical and spiritual. But it wasn't just about the incense. Egyptian perfumes were made from an astonishing variety of ingredients, many of which were sourced from exotic lands: frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, and cardamom. These spices were used not just for scent, but for their supposed magical and medicinal properties. For instance, cinnamon was believed to have purifying qualities, while myrrh was associated with healing and protection. The blending of these ingredients wasn't haphazard. It was highly intentional. The Egyptians believed that the right combination of ingredients could protect the soul, purify the body, or even bring good fortune. Then, of course, there were the oils used for personal anointing. These oils were often infused with flowers, including the lotus and jasmine, and used by both the elite and common Egyptians. The oils weren't just for beauty, they were part of daily life, used for personal hygiene in religious ceremonies, and even as protection against the harsh Egyptian sun. You might even call them an early form of sunscreen, though a little less spiritual and a bit more practical. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians used these oils more for cosmetic purposes or as a form of health and wellness, but it's likely that it was a mix of both. The oils also served as a shield against the dust and heat, which would have been especially important in the arid, sun-baked environment of Egypt. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Some perfumes weren't just made from flowers and resins. In fact, there were certain fragrances that included more unusual ingredients, ones that might raise an eyebrow today. Take, for example, the use of animal fats in some perfume recipes. Yes, you read that right, animal fat. The Egyptians would sometimes mix fat with fragrant oils to create long-lasting perfumes, a technique that you won't find in modern perfume making, but which was very common in the ancient world. Other more exotic ingredients might have included spices and resins from as far away as India, which gives us a glimpse into the expansive trade networks that Egypt had with other cultures. It's amazing to think about how much effort went into creating these perfumes, each one a carefully crafted masterpiece. But as much as these perfumes were used for divine rituals and personal indulgence, they were also seen as items of status. The more complex and exotic the perfume, the higher your standing in society. For the common people, fragrance was a symbol of their devotion to the gods or a sign of respect during important events. But for the elite, it was an opportunity to flaunt wealth. Perfume was currency in ancient Egypt, but it was also a deeply spiritual object, bridging the earthly and divine. As we continue exploring the art and importance of Egyptian perfume, it's impossible to ignore how the creation of these scents wasn't just a casual endeavor. Making perfume in ancient Egypt was a labor of love, patience, and sometimes even decades. In fact, certain perfumes, particularly the rare and highly revered ones, were often created with such dedication and precision that they became almost legendary. One of the most fascinating aspects of Egyptian perfume making was how long it took to perfect a single batch. Can you imagine waiting for years just to get the scent just right? But that was the reality for some of the most prestigious perfumes of the time. You might think this was just some over-the-top luxury for the rich, but for the ancient Egyptians, the time it took to make perfume reflected its spiritual significance. The process itself was sacred, almost a form of meditation. It wasn't just about mixing flowers and oils. It was about creating something that connected the physical world to the divine. Historians still debate whether the Egyptians intended for these perfumes to be used immediately, or if they were meant to be aged like fine wine before being used in special ceremonies. But one thing is clear: the more time and care invested in crafting a perfume, the more revered it was. And this wasn't just a matter of waiting for the perfect scent to develop. The ingredients used in these perfumes were just as important. Many of the ingredients, such as resins from distant lands, exotic spices, and sacred oils, were incredibly rare and difficult to come by. Obtaining these ingredients wasn't an easy task. Ancient Egyptians had to establish far-reaching trade routes across deserts and seas to get their hands on the precious raw materials needed to craft their perfumes. The idea of waiting for years to perfect a perfume seems extreme, but it's actually a reflection of the time and energy they invested in creating something that was as much about ritual as it was about luxury. Perfume makers were often highly respected in society, though not much is known about the individuals who specialized in this craft. What we do know is that these artisans were likely trained for years, passing down their secrets from master to apprentice. The art of perfume making was so coveted that some sources suggest these artisans were kept in almost a semi-sacred status, especially when working on royal or temple perfumes. Their knowledge was considered both an art and a secret. Some of them might have even been considered priests themselves, as their work in crafting the divine scents that graced the gods was seen as an act of worship in itself. Historians still argue over whether perfume makers worked directly for the royal court or if they operated independently. But what we do know is that the making of perfumes was highly specialized. It wasn't just about creating a pleasant fragrance. It was about creating something that could last and serve a purpose far beyond simple indulgence. The oils and balms used by the pharaohs were not just for anointing the body, they were for anointing the soul. They were tools for connecting with the gods, for blessing the body and spirit, and for ensuring protection from harm. In some ways, perfume was seen as a form of immortality. The perfume kept the wearer's essence connected to the divine and ensured their legacy would linger in the air long after they were gone. As much as perfume was a tool for religious practices, it was also a key part of social structure. The wealthy elite, including priests and nobles, would have had access to the most exotic and finely crafted perfumes. These scents were used not just for ceremonial purposes, but to signal one's wealth, taste, and power. You can imagine the elaborate banquets and feasts held in the royal courts, where guests would enter the hall to the overwhelming scent of frankincense and myrrh filling the air. The very air itself seemed to whisper of power, luxury, and divine favor. The importance of perfume in Egyptian society was also evident in their funerary practices. You see, Egypt's fascination with scent didn't stop at death, it continued into the afterlife. When the Egyptians mummified their dead, they made sure to cover the body in sacred oils and perfumes, believing that these fragrances would please the gods and protect the deceased on their journey to the afterlife. The perfumes were meant to help the spirit navigate the dangerous realm of the underworld and to ensure that the deceased would be well received by Osiris, the god of the afterlife. Some of the most famous perfumes used in mummification, such as those made from cinnamon, myrrh, and lotus, were believed to carry the power of protection and immortality. These aromatic oils were carefully applied to the body and even the burial chamber itself. You could say that even in death, Egyptians still wanted to make an impression. And this wasn't just a practical decision, it was an expression of their belief that scent had the power to transcend the physical world and connect with the divine. The idea of scent as a divine tool was so powerful that it became a central part of Egypt's religious and cultural identity. Perfume wasn't just for the living, it was part of the legacy of the dead. And as strange as it might seem, even today, centuries later, we still find ourselves drawn to the same types of scents that the Egyptians cherished, fragrances that speak to us of power, mystery, and the divine. Let's now turn our attention to the cultural and spiritual layers surrounding Egyptian perfume. As we've already seen, scent was an incredibly important part of Egyptian daily life, from royal rituals to common practices, and it was tightly woven into their understanding of the cosmos. But what really sets Egyptian perfume apart is the deep connection it had with the ancient worldview. The Egyptians viewed the world through a lens that saw everything, nature, objects, even scents, as part of a larger, interconnected system. Perfume in this regard wasn't just a product, it was a symbol of balance, order, and even cosmic harmony. For the ancient Egyptians, the universe operated on a delicate balance, and perfume was thought to help maintain that equilibrium. Just as the gods maintained the world in harmony, so too did scent oils and resins work to keep both the body and spirit in perfect balance. You might even think of it as an early form of holistic health, combining nature's offerings for both physical and spiritual well-being. The Egyptians believed that scent was a direct channel to the gods, a way to align oneself with cosmic forces. It was no accident that perfumes were used in temples or offered as gifts to deities. They were not just meant to please the senses, but to maintain the natural order. This belief extended to the use of perfume in healing practices. Egyptian medicine wasn't purely about herbs and potions. It was also about using scent to create harmony within the body. Aromatherapy, in a sense, was a deeply spiritual act. We've already discussed how the Egyptians used myrrh and frankincense for their medicinal properties. But the act of anointing someone with fragrant oils went far beyond mere health benefits. It was believed that the very act of anointing, especially when accompanied by prayer or ritual, would restore balance to the person's body and spirit. The use of perfume as a form of healing also extended to the dead. Remember how Egyptians applied oils and resins to the mummified bodies of their loved ones. This wasn't just to preserve the physical form. It was to ensure that the deceased spirit was guided safely through the underworld and into the afterlife. The sacred oils used in the embalming process were meant to protect the deceased from evil spirits and ensure that the body remained in good condition for the journey to the afterlife. In a way, these perfumes were believed to act as protective charms, warding off malevolent forces and offering comfort to the deceased. Historians still argue about how much the Egyptians truly believed in the mystical qualities of scent, whether they were using fragrance purely for its psychological or physical effects, or whether they genuinely thought that the perfumes could influence the gods and the afterlife. Either way, it's clear that perfume in ancient Egypt wasn't a casual luxury. It was a potent tool with the power to connect the mortal and divine worlds, heal the body, and guide the soul. Now you might be wondering about the ingredients themselves. Many of these perfumes and oils were made from plants that had symbolic meanings. Take, for example, the lotus flower, which was considered sacred in Egypt. The lotus wasn't just a beautiful flower. It was also a symbol of rebirth and creation. The lotus's deep connection to the gods made it a prized ingredient for perfumes used in funerary rites. Its fragrance, when used in burial rituals, was meant to symbolize the purity of the deceased soul and their transition to the afterlife. This is just one example of how the Egyptians didn't just craft perfumes for scent. They crafted them with the intention of communicating something deeper, something spiritual. The power of these ingredients, combined with the artistry of the perfumers, created fragrances that weren't just about beauty or luxury, they were about stories. Each fragrance told a tale of gods, of power, of immortality. The process of making perfume was an act of creation, an act of bringing the divine into the material world. And the result was not just something that smelled good. It was something that had the power to transport the wearer or the observer to another realm. As much as we think of perfume today as a personal indulgence, it's important to remember that in ancient Egypt, perfume was a sacred art, an essential part of daily life, and a bridge to the divine. The Egyptians weren't just concerned with how they smelled. They were concerned with how they were connected to the gods. The very act of applying perfume was a ritual, a way of inviting the divine into their lives and ensuring they were in harmony with the universe. This complex relationship with scent didn't stop with the Egyptians. As Egypt's perfume trade expanded, its influence spread throughout the ancient world, from Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean, and its sacred use of fragrance would eventually influence the perfume-making traditions of other civilizations. But it all began in Egypt, where perfume was more than just a luxury. It was a way of life, a way to maintain order, balance, and connection with the divine. We've now touched on the vast cultural significance of Egyptian perfume. But let's take a moment to look at how the ancient Egyptians actually used these fragrances in their everyday lives. While perfume was closely tied to religious practices and the afterlife, it also had a very practical application in daily life. For the Egyptians, scent wasn't just a luxury reserved for the elite or for ceremonial purposes. It was an essential part of their daily existence. From the moment they woke up to the moment they went to bed, the fragrances they used were interwoven into their routines. Let's imagine waking up in a sunlit home in ancient Egypt. The smell of freshly baked bread fills the air as you begin your day. But it isn't just the bread you smell. It's also the faint scent of oils and resins lingering from the night before. You see, Egyptians were avid users of perfumes and oils as part of their grooming routines. In fact, it wasn't unusual for people of all social classes to apply fragrant oils throughout the day, not just for ritualistic reasons, but to protect their skin from the harsh desert sun and the dry, dusty air. Oils made from lotus, frankincense, and myrrh were often used as moisturizers, while others were used to protect the skin from sunburns, much like modern sunscreen. They were also thought to have antiseptic properties, protecting the skin from infections. It's a bit amusing to think about ancient Egyptians might not have had SPF 50, but they certainly knew how to use their oils to fight off the effects of the sun. Some historians even believe that the Egyptians had early forms of what we might now consider beauty treatments, using oils not just for health, but for their skin's overall appearance. So it wasn't all about luxury, it was very practical too. But it wasn't just about applying oils and perfumes to the body. These fragrances also made their way into the homes of ancient Egyptians in a way that was much more personal than we might expect today. Ancient Egyptian homes, especially among the wealthy, would often be filled with the soft, soothing aromas of incense burning in the background, creating an atmosphere of calm and relaxation. Imagine entering a grand home in Thebes, where the scent of myrrh, sandalwood, and cinnamon gently drifts through the air, subtly setting the mood for the day or evening. For the Egyptians, scent was as much about creating ambiance as it was about personal cleanliness or divine connection. Historians still debate whether the use of perfumes was purely for aesthetic or social reasons, or if it also had a deeper spiritual impact. Some believe that perfumes used in the home helped maintain a calm and pleasant environment, while others argue that the fragrances were a means of maintaining the spiritual sanctity of the space. Either way, the ancient Egyptians were ahead of their time in terms of integrating scent into their daily lives long before air fresheners or essential oils became part of our modern routines. Even their bathhouses, where they would cleanse themselves after long days under the blazing sun, were filled with the rich scents of fragrant oils and herbs. Bathing was seen not just as a hygienic necessity, but also as a form of rejuvenation. The scents of the oils used in bathing were thought to renew the soul, wash away any lingering impurities, and prepare the person for the next day's challenges. For the Egyptians, taking a bath wasn't just about cleanliness, it was a ritual that connected the physical body to the spiritual self. Now, let's zoom in on one of the most interesting aspects of Egyptian perfume, use its connection to sexuality and allure. While much of the use of perfumes in ancient Egypt was tied to the gods and to spiritual practices, there was also a sensual side to these fragrances. Just as we might use perfumes today to make ourselves more attractive, the ancient Egyptians were keenly aware of the power that scent had over attraction. They didn't just use perfume to ward off the unpleasant smells of daily life, or to honor the gods. They also used it to enhance their personal appeal. Both men and women in ancient Egypt used perfumes for this purpose, applying fragrant oils to their bodies before social events, banquets, and intimate gatherings. The aromas of jasmine, myrrh, and cinnamon would swirl through the air, evoking a sense of mystery and desire. In fact, the use of perfume in this context was so ingrained in their culture that even the tombs of the most revered individuals, including pharaohs, were often accompanied by intricate carvings or paintings of perfumes being applied to their bodies. It was as though the Egyptians believed that scent had a direct connection to one's attractiveness and even one's ability to maintain their status in society. Historians still debate whether the perfume was primarily used to attract a mate, or if it served as a means of making the wearer appear more divine. But it seems that scent in this sense was seen as a tool of empowerment, something that made you stand out, whether in a romantic context or in a social one. The pharaohs, for example, were often depicted in art surrounded by lavish offerings of perfume, which symbolized their connection to the gods and their ability to charm both their subjects and the deities. Perhaps the most famous instance of the sensual power of perfume in ancient Egypt comes from the legend of Cleopatra, who was said to have used exotic and alluring scents to enchant Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. According to ancient accounts, Cleopatra would have her sails perfumed as she sailed towards Rome, ensuring that the very wind carried her scent before she even arrived. Whether this is just a colorful myth or rooted in some truth, it speaks volumes about how the Egyptians understood the role of scent in both everyday life and in matters of power, attraction, and influence. As we delve deeper into the Egyptian perfume trade, it's impossible to overlook how crucial the art of perfume making was to the economy of ancient Egypt. While we often think of perfume as a luxury product in ancient Egypt, it was more than that. It was a commodity. And like any commodity, it was tightly regulated, heavily traded, and fiercely guarded. From the moment the first drops of fragrant oil were created, the perfume trade would become a significant part of Egypt's economy and its interactions with neighboring civilizations. We already know that the ingredients for these perfumes, frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, and other exotic materials, came from far and wide, but it wasn't just the raw materials that were traded. The finished perfumes themselves became highly sought-after products, and they were used as diplomatic gifts, symbols of wealth, and even offerings to gods. When a pharaoh wanted to establish alliances with neighboring states, it wasn't uncommon for them to send large quantities of luxurious perfumes as gifts. The perfume wasn't just a token, it was an important part of the political exchange, a way of showing status, sophistication, and divine favor. One of the most fascinating aspects of this trade was how Egypt's perfume industry became a bridge between Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. Trade routes that stretched across the Arabian Peninsula, the Red Sea, and up into the Mediterranean all funneled valuable perfume ingredients into Egypt's cities. The perfume itself then traveled out from Egypt to other civilizations, especially during the height of the Egyptian Empire, when Egypt's influence stretched from the Levant to the far reaches of the Mediterranean. These perfumes were not just for everyday Egyptians, they were a symbol of Egypt's international power. But the production and export of these fragrances were also a way for Egypt to assert its cultural dominance. Perfume making in Egypt wasn't just a craft, it was an art form, an expression of Egyptian identity that spread far beyond the Nile Valley. And yet, even as Egyptians mastered the art of perfume, they weren't the only ones involved in the trade. The Greeks, Romans, and Persians all took their cues from Egyptian perfume-making techniques, adding their own flavors and ingredients to the mix. As Egypt's perfume industry grew, so did the cities and workshops dedicated to producing the finest oils. The city of Alexandria, in particular, became a major center for perfume production. Alexandria was known not only for its wealth and culture, but also for its bustling trade of perfumes and other luxury goods. And it wasn't just large workshops that handled perfume production. Individual artisans were also deeply involved in the craft. The ability to create a fragrance that was truly divine was considered a form of sacred knowledge, and the most skilled perfumers were seen as close to priests in terms of their respect and status within Egyptian society. Perfume in ancient Egypt, as we've seen, wasn't just a luxury item. It was a commodity that generated wealth and fostered diplomacy. The international perfume trade also meant that Egypt wasn't isolated in its craft. As these perfumes spread across the Mediterranean and into Europe, they were adopted and adapted by other cultures. But what's truly remarkable is how the ancient Egyptians didn't just trade in raw materials or finished products, they also traded in ideas. One of the major innovations Egypt brought to the world of perfume was the use of aromatic distillation. While the Greeks and Romans would later refine the process, it was the Egyptians who first began experimenting with distillation techniques to extract essential oils from flowers and other natural materials. This method made perfume production more efficient and allowed for a greater variety of scents to be created. It's one of those subtle but significant contributions that Egypt made to world history, essentially laying the foundation for modern perfumery. While perfume making might seem like a niche aspect of Egyptian life, it had far-reaching consequences. It influenced everything from international trade to religious practices, and its legacy can still be felt today in the fragrance industry. The ancient Egyptians were ahead of their time, and their innovative techniques in perfume making had an enduring impact on the world. Just imagine, while we today might casually dab a little cologne on in the morning, the origins of that scent go back thousands of years to a society that saw perfume as more than just a luxury. For them, it was part of a grander cosmic order, something that connected the physical and spiritual realms. In a sense, every time we smell something fragrant, we are participating in a tradition that stretches all the way back to the land of the pharaohs. Historians still argue whether Egyptian perfume making was the first instance of distillation in human history. While it's clear that Egypt was a pioneer in using aromatic oils, the debate continues as to whether other ancient civilizations had similar techniques. Nevertheless, there's no denying that Egypt played a pivotal role in shaping the way perfumes would evolve through the centuries. Egypt's perfume legacy lives on today, not just in the global fragrance industry, but also in how we perceive scent itself. What the Egyptians understood, more so than perhaps any other civilization, is that scent is powerful. It can evoke memories, stir emotions, and even transport us to another place and time. And in the case of Egypt, it connected their society to the gods, to the afterlife, and to the larger mysteries of the universe. As we continue to explore the lasting legacy of Egyptian perfume, it's essential to delve into the influence that the ancient Egyptians had on the world of fragrance, not just in their immediate surroundings, but across distant lands and cultures. From their innovative methods of perfume making to their ability to incorporate scent into their most sacred rituals, the Egyptians were pioneers in ways that would shape perfume culture for millennia to come. But there's something even more fascinating to consider: how these perfumes, once bound to Egyptian religious practices, transcended cultural boundaries and became integral to the development of fragrance across the Mediterranean and beyond. The legacy of Egyptian perfume making spread widely, particularly during the Greco-Roman period. After Alexander the Great's conquest of Egypt in 332 BCE, the Greeks began to absorb many aspects of Egyptian culture, and this included the highly revered art of perfumery. Greek intellectuals, philosophers, and even the aristocracy became enamored with the luxurious scents that had been carefully crafted by Egyptian artisans. Alexandria, Egypt's vibrant port city, became a major center for both trade and knowledge, with perfume-making techniques flowing westward into Greece and Rome. Perfume making was so admired by the Greeks that they adopted it in their own lives, but also began refining the techniques the Egyptians had established. Historians believe that the Greeks played a significant role in improving the methods of distillation, which allowed them to extract more complex and potent fragrances from plants and flowers. This innovation was a natural outgrowth of their appreciation for the scents of the East, and it led to the development of more sophisticated perfumes that became a mark of luxury for the elite. By the time the Roman Empire came into power, perfume had moved from a spiritual and luxury item to something far more common, though still highly valued. Interestingly, as perfume spread across the Mediterranean, it was also connected to another significant cultural exchange, the blending of Egyptian and Greco-Roman religious practices. In both Egyptian and Greek rituals, perfume was used as an offering to the gods, and that practice was quickly incorporated into Roman ceremonies as well. It wasn't just about wearing fragrance, it was about the symbolism of offering fragrance to the divine. This is perhaps most vividly illustrated in the famed Roman baths, where perfume was often used in the water and steam, and where scented oils were applied during massages. The Greeks and Romans believed that bathing in fragrant water could cleanse both body and spirit, much like the Egyptians did with their oils. The tradition of using scent as a spiritual balm was now shared across cultures, an ongoing testament to Egypt's influence. While it's clear that Egypt's perfume trade impacted the Mediterranean world, there's another fascinating side to this story: how perfume reached the Far East. Egypt's perfume-making techniques had far-reaching consequences, particularly for ancient Persia and India. Both cultures had rich, complex spiritual practices, and they, too, began to embrace fragrance in ways that intertwined with their beliefs about the soul and the cosmos. In Persia, especially, the use of perfumes was closely associated with the courtly life, where kings and queens surrounded themselves with the finest oils and fragrances. The tradition of gifting perfumes to royalty was borrowed directly from Egyptian practices, and the legacy of this trade influenced the development of perfume in Persia, India, and Arabia. What's fascinating about this diffusion of Egyptian perfume culture is that it wasn't just about the flow of goods, it was also about the exchange of ideas. As perfume making traveled along the Silk Road, it intertwined with other artistic and cultural traditions. For instance, while the Egyptians prized certain aromatic resins like myrrh, frankincense, and cinnamon, it was the Chinese who would go on to integrate other scents into their unique aromatic traditions, such as jasmine lily and even incense made from sandalwood. These hybrid perfume traditions would influence cultures for centuries to come. The spread of perfume making also had a profound impact on the Islamic world, where fragrance held both spiritual and practical value. In the early centuries of Islam, perfumes became a symbol of purity, and the use of scent during daily prayers became common. The ancient Egyptian influence on perfume rituals continued to reverberate through the ages, and many scholars believe that it was through the Arab world that perfume-making knowledge reached Europe in the Middle Ages. This cultural diffusion laid the foundation for the European fragrance industry, which by the Renaissance was already an important part of European courts and royal courts. But what about the common people? While perfumes remained a luxury item for the elite, in many cultures, the idea of fragrance slowly began to trickle down to broader society. What was once reserved for the pharaohs and priests of Egypt now became something more widely available. This democratization of perfume wasn't instantaneous, but over time, as trade routes grew and economies expanded, it became increasingly accessible to ordinary people in ancient civilizations. Perfume's transformation from something exclusively for the elite to something available to all is a story of globalization, trade, and cultural adaptation. The journey of Egyptian perfume from sacred oil to luxury product is one of the most fascinating chapters in the history of scent. It's a story of how a simple craft became part of the fabric of civilization, shaping social customs, religious rituals, and economic systems all over the ancient world. Historians still debate the exact timeline of perfume's global spread. Some argue that the Egyptians' influence was paramount in the initial stages, while others suggest that the Greeks and Romans had just as much of an impact on the development of modern perfumery. Regardless of the specifics, what's clear is that Egypt was the first to integrate scent into all aspects of life, not just for personal use, but as a tool to connect with the divine, to build diplomatic relations, and to communicate status and wealth. And over time, that Egyptian legacy was absorbed and transformed by countless cultures, laying the groundwork for the perfume industry we know today. As the centuries passed, Egypt's influence on perfume continued to spread, leaving behind a legacy that would survive in the form of rich exotic scents, and more interestingly, in the cultural associations tied to fragrance. By now, it's clear that perfume wasn't just a physical commodity, it was a symbol. In the ancient world, perfumes and oils were far more than simple luxuries or pleasant smells. They carried meanings of power, beauty, spirituality, and even status. Whether it was a pharaoh preparing for a religious ceremony or a merchant sending a scented gift to a distant ruler, perfume was always a symbol of something greater. And as we'll see, this cultural symbolism persists today. By the time the Roman Empire reached its zenith, perfume had already been fully integrated into European society, and once again, it was Egypt that had paved the way. Roman aristocrats, much like their Greek counterparts, were enamored with Egyptian perfumes. They would import the finest oils and resins, some of which were reserved only for the most exclusive of Roman elites. The use of perfume became a status symbol in Rome, with elaborate fragrance rituals that paralleled those of ancient Egypt. Roman baths, in particular, became a key area where perfumes were applied and appreciated. The practice of scenting water in bathhouses was directly inherited from Egyptian customs, but the Romans also popularized the use of scented oils in massages and other luxurious grooming activities. The Roman elite used perfumes not only for personal care, but also as a way to assert their power. The fragrance they wore and displayed in their homes became an extension of their wealth and refinement. One could almost imagine the scent of rich oils filling the halls of a Roman villa as the emperor or noble entertained guests. And it wasn't just the rich and powerful who indulged in perfumes. Over time, even middle-class Romans began to see the benefit of incorporating scent into their daily routines. The introduction of perfumes into everyday life helped cement its place in the wider Mediterranean world, linking it forever to social rituals, personal identity, and the luxury of the imperial court. The fascinating thing, however, is how the art of perfume making evolved once it entered these new societies. In the Roman Empire, the use of perfume evolved from something used primarily for spiritual or personal purposes into a broader cultural phenomenon. People would mix different oils, spices, and resins to create unique fragrances tailored to individual tastes. The Romans were particularly fond of combining their perfumes with herbs like lavender and rosemary, creating mixtures that had both a pleasant fragrance and an invigorating healthful effect. The influence of Egyptian perfumery techniques had expanded to include new ingredients and methods, paving the way for the much more complex perfumes that would eventually develop in medieval Europe. And yet, despite this evolving nature of fragrance, the underlying principles that Egyptians had laid down remained remarkably consistent. Egyptian perfumers knew that scent was powerful. It could calm the mind, heal the body, and in some ways even connect the soul to the gods. They understood that the blending of oils was as much an art as it was a science, and that the right combination of fragrances could create something that transcended the physical world. In many ways, this philosophy about scent and its connection to the divine would continue to shape how fragrance was used in future generations. While ancient Egypt laid the foundation for the use of perfume across the Mediterranean, it wasn't just the Egyptians who influenced future generations. The Persians, Arabs, and later Europeans all borrowed elements from Egyptian perfume culture and added their own interpretations. The Arab world in particular was instrumental in preserving and enhancing Egyptian perfume-making knowledge during the Middle Ages. Through the Islamic Golden Age, perfumes were not just produced, they were celebrated as an essential part of Islamic culture. Arabic scholars documented and refined the distillation process and created new methods for extracting fragrances, ensuring the survival of perfume-making knowledge that would later influence the European Renaissance. Interestingly, the Arabic world's connection to perfume goes beyond just luxury and beauty. In Islamic culture, fragrance holds significant spiritual meaning. Perfumes were used to purify the body before prayer, and they were also seen as a means of preparing oneself for the divine presence. In fact, some Islamic texts even describe perfumes as a way to symbolize one's relationship with God, just as the ancient Egyptians used scent in offerings to their gods. In this context, perfumes were not just pleasurable, they were deeply tied to religious practice and spiritual purification. So the next time you apply a fragrance, whether it's a spritz of your favorite cologne or a dab of an essential oil, remember that you're participating in a tradition that stretches back millennia. From the sacred oils of ancient Egypt to the rich perfumes of the Roman Empire, and through the refinement and expansion of the craft in the Arab world, the art of fragrance is both a link to our past and a luxury we continue to enjoy today. Yet, despite its long history, there's a curious modern disconnect that occurs when it comes to the perfume industry. While we're quick to purchase our favorite fragrances, it's easy to forget the ancient symbolism attached to scent, the way it was once tied to power, spirituality, and the divine. In a world where perfumes are now available at every corner store, it's hard to imagine that a single bottle of fragrance could have once been seen as a gift that could change the course of history or as a potent offering to the gods. And yet, this was the reality for those ancient Egyptians, Romans, and Persians. The next time you open a bottle, think of the journey it took, how scent, once a divine and powerful force, continues to be part of our world today. As we step further into the world of ancient perfumes, we now find ourselves looking at the creation of perfume in the everyday lives of the Egyptians. By this point, you're probably thinking about the luxurious and religious uses of scent in temples or palaces. But let's take a moment to consider how the common people of ancient Egypt utilized fragrances in their daily lives. Surprisingly, despite the complexity and ritualistic nature of perfume production, These same luxurious oils were sometimes available to ordinary Egyptians, though of course in smaller quantities and perhaps less refined formulas. The concept of perfume, once reserved only for the elite, slowly found its way into the homes and routines of everyday citizens. To start, it's important to understand the role that scent played beyond just personal adornment. The Egyptians, like most ancient civilizations, lived in a world where hygiene was vastly different from our own. With few modern sanitation practices, everyday life in Egypt involved natural elements like dust sweat and the heat of the sun. As such, fragrant oils served a dual purpose. Beyond masking unpleasant odors, they were believed to protect the skin from the harsh conditions of the environment. Oils infused with myrrh and frankincense would be applied to the skin to create a barrier against the scorching heat and to hydrate and preserve the skin. These oils also served as a way to soothe sunburns and keep skin soft, proving that perfume's relationship to health was always intertwined with its use for luxury. Historians still debate the extent to which perfumes were used for medicinal purposes. While we know they were primarily seen as luxury items, there is evidence to suggest that many of the oils Egyptians used also had healing properties. Some of these oils were applied not only for their pleasant fragrance, but for their purported ability to heal wounds, prevent infection, and ease pain. For example, frankincense was believed to have anti-inflammatory properties, while myrrh was used to treat everything from sore throats to digestive issues. Even though the ancient Egyptians were hardly equipped with the modern science we have today, they understood the therapeutic benefits of these natural oils, particularly when combined in various formulas. However, it wasn't just about skincare. Perfumes in Egypt were also used as a form of personal expression. The fragrance you wore, much like the clothing you adorned, could convey a certain social status. Even though perfume-making techniques were well known across the population, the type of fragrance you wore, the quality of the oils, and how often you applied it could reflect your standing within society. This is one of the most enduring and fascinating aspects of perfume throughout history, its ability to be both a personal experience and a social marker. So, while the pharaoh and his court may have had access to exotic and incredibly rare perfumes, the middle class might have contented themselves with more locally sourced oils and scents. But the practice of using fragrance to enhance one's personal identity was consistent across all levels of society. Perfumes were also used in social gatherings and family events, including weddings and funerals. Imagine an Egyptian bride walking down the aisle, a delicate cloud of scent trailing behind her, symbolizing not only her beauty, but also a promise of fertility and divine favor. The use of scent was symbolic here too, as fragrances like jasmine or lotus were linked with love and sexuality. At the other end of the spectrum, perfumes were equally important in funerary practices. In these rituals, the scents used were not for the living, but for the dead, designed to honor the gods and the spirits of the departed. Oils and perfumes were applied to mummies and placed in tombs, as the Egyptians believed that the use of scent could help guide the soul of the deceased to the afterlife. The fascinating thing here is how Egyptian perfumes were woven into the very fabric of daily life, not just for the elite, but for all. Whether you were a noble living in the grand palaces of Thebes, or a humble artisan in a bustling village, fragrance had a place in your world. Of course, there were differences in quality, availability, and expense, but the act of using fragrance was universal. It's clear that the Egyptians saw scent as something that transcended social class. This democratic approach to fragrance allowed everyone, no matter their wealth or status, to partake in the rituals and pleasures that scent provided. Now let's turn our attention to the practical side of perfume making, particularly the tools and techniques that the ancient Egyptians used to create their signature scents. Ancient perfume making was an intricate process that took many years to perfect. First, the essential ingredients, flowers, resins, oils, and spices were carefully gathered, often from distant lands. These raw materials were then crushed, boiled, and mixed using techniques that would seem surprisingly familiar to modern perfumers. Some ingredients were even burnt to release their oils, while others were steeped in oils to extract their essence. What's truly remarkable about this process is the level of refinement the Egyptians achieved with such basic tools. Their techniques involved the use of rudimentary distillation, and it's believed that the Egyptians were some of the first to experiment with extracting essential oils through a type of vapor condensation. This allowed them to create more concentrated and longer-lasting scents. Imagine sitting in a workshop with a craftsman watching as they carefully pour fragrant oils into an intricately designed jar, the rich, heavy scents filling the air. As they mix the oils, a true art form in the making. The tools used by these perfumers were simple but effective: large stone mortars for grinding, heat sources for distillation, and delicate glass vessels for storing the final products. Perfume production in ancient Egypt was, for all its complexity, a meticulous and carefully orchestrated process, where even the smallest details, like the type of container the perfume was kept in, were of utmost importance. This was not just about making a pleasant smell. It was about creating an experience, an object that would be revered, cherished, and in some cases, passed down for generations. Historians still argue over the precise method the Egyptians used for distillation. While evidence suggests that they used rudimentary techniques, it's unclear whether they had full mastery of the process as we understand it today. What is clear, however, is that the Egyptians laid the groundwork for the advanced perfume-making methods that would be perfected in later civilizations. As you drift deeper into this fascinating world, it's easy to see how perfume became not just a luxury or ritual object, but something far more profound in the lives of the Egyptians. Whether for personal use, social status, spiritual connection, or even medicinal purposes, the role of fragrance in Egypt was multifaceted and deeply embedded in daily life. And as you continue your journey through time, it's reassuring to think that even though perfume may have evolved in its form and use, its magic remains as powerful today as it was thousands of years ago. By now, you've seen how the ancient Egyptians, through a combination of practical knowledge and spiritual belief, elevated the art of perfume to an entirely new level. From their complex rituals to the luxurious oils they produced, perfume was more than just a fragrance. It was a symbol of connection to the divine, a marker of status, and even a form of medicine. But as you drift deeper into the intricacies of ancient Egyptian perfume culture, you might wonder how this deeply ingrained tradition evolved as Egypt itself transformed. With the rise of powerful dynasties, Egypt experienced vast changes, and the use of perfume adapted accordingly. It wasn't just the pharaohs who became ever more obsessed with the scents that surrounded them. It was the entire society. By the time of the New Kingdom, around 1500, BCE Egyptian civilization had reached its height, and perfume had woven itself into the very fabric of daily existence. This is when we see a significant increase in the sheer variety of fragrances and the widespread use of them across all levels of society. Perfume no longer remained an elite luxury, but began to seep into the mainstream, becoming a part of life for everyone from royalty to artisans. At this point in Egypt's history, perfumes were used for both personal and practical reasons. They were seen as an enhancement to one's social standing, and even considered essential for daily life, particularly in the context of cleanliness and hygiene. With the brutal heat of the Egyptian climate, perfumes served a dual purpose. While they provided an air of refinement, they also masked the smell of sweat and body odor, which would have been a significant concern given the lack of modern bathing practices. This made perfumes essential for anyone looking to maintain a respectable image in society. It's interesting to note how Egyptian society's obsession with scent even bled into their more personal, intimate relationships. For example, during the reign of Cleopatra, perfumes played an important role in courtship. Cleopatra, known for her beauty and charm, is said to have used perfume as a weapon in her arsenal of attraction. Historical accounts suggest that she would bathe in scented oils, leaving a lingering trail of fragrance wherever she went. She even created her own signature scents, which became as synonymous with her allure as her famous intellectual and political prowess. This historical tidbit might sound like something from a love story, but it's rooted in the reality of how perfume became a tool for personal expression, even for rulers. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's use of perfume was an entirely calculated, politically driven act or a more genuine expression of her personal tastes. Either way, perfume became a key part of her identity, and it wasn't just her who used fragrance in such a way. Many of the upper-class Egyptians followed suit. By the time Egypt was ruled by Greek and later Roman powers, perfume had transcended from being an Egyptian luxury to an almost universal symbol of opulence. As we've seen earlier, this wasn't just confined to Egyptian courtly life. It spread to other Mediterranean societies and over time to the rest of the world. But perfume's significance didn't only rest on its aesthetic use in Egypt. The Egyptians were also among the first to truly understand the process of extracting scents from plants and flowers, and they refined these techniques with a level of expertise that was unrivaled at the time. While they didn't have the advanced technologies we have today, they used every method at their disposal to extract fragrances from crushing plants to boiling them down to their aromatic oils. They understood that different scents had different properties. Some could be calming, others stimulating, and still others, like myrrh and frankincense, were deeply spiritual and ceremonial in nature. The ancient Egyptians recognized that scents could influence mood and behavior, and they capitalized on this knowledge in their rituals, their medical practices, and even their day-to-day lives. This understanding of scent's power extended to their medicine as well. While the Egyptians were not as scientifically advanced as we are today, they had a deeply intuitive grasp of how to harness nature for healing purposes. The oils they created weren't just for smelling. They were also considered to have medicinal properties. For example, the oil of cinnamon was believed to treat digestive problems, while peppermint was thought to relieve headaches. Oils were used to soothe burns, heal wounds, and even treat psychological conditions like anxiety. Perfumes were used in much the same way that modern essential oils are today, though they certainly didn't have the clinical evidence we rely on. Now the Egyptians had a clear understanding of the therapeutic effects of fragrance. Interestingly, many of these ancient perfume recipes have survived through the centuries, fragments of ancient Egyptian perfume containers have been uncovered in tombs and archaeological sites, and these vessels still hold traces of their once potent contents. Some of the formulas used by Egyptian perfumers have even been reconstructed by modern perfumers who seek to capture the essence of these long-lost fragrances. Though we may never truly know the full complexity of the scents that filled the air in ancient Egypt, the remnants that remain offer us a tantalizing glimpse into their world. Even more fascinating is how these ancient practices laid the foundation for perfume making across the globe. As we've already seen, perfume making techniques spread from Egypt to Greece, Rome, and beyond. The art of perfume making, refined and practiced in Egypt, eventually reached the Middle East and Persia, where it was further developed. From there, it traveled west to Europe, where it found its place in the royal courts of France and England. The ancient Egyptians may have long since faded from history, but their impact on the perfume industry remains as potent as ever. Historians still debate whether the Egyptians were the sole originators of perfume making, or if other ancient civilizations such as the Sumerians or Babylonians were equally influential. What is clear, however, is that the Egyptians were the first to integrate scent into their culture to such a profound degree. They understood that perfume could not only enhance one's beauty or mask odors, it could influence moods, elevate spiritual experiences, and even serve as a means of connecting with the divine. In many ways, the Egyptians understood perfume better than any culture before them, and their legacy continues to shape the perfume industry to this day. As you begin to unwind deeper into the magic of ancient Egypt's fragrant world, it's clear that perfume was so much more than just a luxury product. It was a deeply embedded part of religious practices, personal care, and social dynamics. Now let's explore the final phase of perfume's evolution in Egypt, where we see how it became intricately tied to the culture of death and the afterlife. Perfume, in the Egyptian worldview, wasn't just for the living, it was also a gift to the dead. In Egypt, death was not seen as the end, but as a transition, a journey into the afterlife. To prepare for this journey, Egyptians believed that their deceased loved ones needed a proper send-off, one that included not only the necessary grave goods, food and treasures, but also crucially perfume. When a person passed away, their body was carefully embalmed, mummified, and dressed in fine linens. Along with these ritualistic practices, the application of perfumes was seen as vital for ensuring that the soul would make its way to the afterlife unhindered. It was believed that the scents would appease the gods and protect the deceased from the dangers they might face in the underworld. One of the most famous examples of this is the embalming process itself. As part of the mummification, the internal organs were removed and treated with aromatic substances such as myrrh, frankincense, and resin. These were meant to preserve the body and protect it from decay, but they also served a deeper purpose, ensuring that the soul would be properly welcomed in the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that by filling the tomb with the rich scents of these precious oils, they were providing both comfort and protection for the deceased in the next life. The perfume, like the other grave goods, was a provision for the spirit. Historians still debate whether the use of perfume in burial rituals was a purely religious practice, or if it also had practical purposes. Some scholars argue that these fragrances served as a way to mask the inevitable decomposition of the body, while others point to their spiritual significance in Egyptian culture. What seems clear is that perfume was central to the Egyptian conception of death and the afterlife, and the idea of scent as a guide through the underworld, endured throughout centuries of Egyptian history. As part of these funerary customs, perfume also became associated with one of the most iconic symbols of Egyptian death, the sarcophagus. These elaborate stone coffins were sometimes lined with fragrant materials, ensuring that the tomb of a royal or noble person was filled with rich, luxurious aromas. In some cases, the perfume was so important that it was buried in specially crafted containers shaped like flowers or animals to symbolize the deceased's journey to the afterlife. These beautifully crafted bottles of scent weren't just tokens of luxury, they were integral parts of the ceremony that helped guide the soul safely to its final resting place. This practice continued even after Egypt's empire began to decline, especially during the Greco-Roman period. The influence of Egyptian funeral rites spread across the Mediterranean world, and the use of perfume in burial rites became a significant part of funeral customs in other cultures, from the Romans to the Byzantines. In fact, the ancient Egyptians can be credited with popularizing the idea of using perfume for both personal and ceremonial purposes, a tradition that would be carried on by future civilizations. Now imagine that scene inside the tomb. A gentle waft of fragrant oils mingles with the sounds of ritual chants as priests and mourners pay their respects. The air is thick with the scent of myrrh, frankincense, and jasmine, each fragrance adding its layer to the complex atmosphere of reverence. These perfumes, so intricately tied to the religious beliefs and customs of the time, continue to linger in our imaginations. Even today, when you smell myrrh or frankincense, it's impossible not to think of ancient Egypt, the land of the pharaohs, the pyramids, and the timeless allure of perfume. But it wasn't just about the fragrances that surrounded the dead. The Egyptians were also skilled in creating perfumes that were meant to mark important moments in life, both joyous and sorrowful. Wedding ceremonies, for example, were a key occasion for perfume. While today, we might associate fragrance with personal allure or social status, for the ancient Egyptians, perfume was a symbol of fertility, love, and divine blessing. The scent of flowers, like jasmine, lotus, and lily, were often used in these ceremonies, believed to carry a divine essence that would ensure the union was fruitful and blessed. Historians still debate the exact role of perfume in ancient Egyptian weddings. Some scholars argue that perfume was simply a form of luxury, while others suggest it had a more profound spiritual significance connecting the couple to the gods. Regardless of the exact interpretation, one thing is clear. Perfume was central to marking life's most important moments. From birth to death, perfume was there, weaving its magic through every stage of life, tying the living to the gods, the past to the future, and the soul to the divine. Now take a moment to imagine a wedding ceremony in ancient Egypt. The bride, draped in linen, walks toward her new husband, the air filled with the sweet fragrance of lotus and jasmine. This scent would linger in the air for days, perhaps even weeks, representing the eternal bond between the couple and their connection to the divine. Imagine the perfume as much a part of the ceremony as the rituals and vows. It's easy to see why the ancient Egyptians were so captivated by scent. Perfume wasn't just about fragrance. It was about life, death, and everything in between. As we move away from the grandeur of these sacred rituals, it's worth noting how perfume became a key aspect of Egyptian trade and commerce. The wealth of fragrant oils and resins from Egypt reached distant lands through the bustling trade networks that spanned across Africa, the Mediterranean, and even into Asia. These oils were not just luxury goods, They were also valued as medicine, as offerings to the gods, and as part of the social customs of neighboring cultures. It's incredible to think that something as simple as a bottle of perfume could transcend borders and cultures, making its way into the hearts and homes of civilizations far beyond Egypt's own. By now, the story of perfume in ancient Egypt feels almost complete, but there's one last facet we need to explore before we can put down the bottle and close the lid. That final aspect is how Egyptian perfume making, much like their culture, spread across time and space, influencing future civilizations in unexpected ways. The perfumes that were once carefully crafted within Egypt's borders didn't just remain there. They made their way into the world, carried by traders, conquerors, and explorers, shaping the future of fragrance in the Mediterranean, Asia, and Europe. As we look beyond Egypt, it's fascinating to see how perfume making evolved in Greece and Rome. The Egyptians were far ahead of their time when it came to scent, and many Greek and Roman writers and philosophers documented the perfume techniques they encountered during their travels to Egypt. One famous historical figure, the Greek historian Herodotus, wrote extensively about Egypt and its customs, including the use of perfumes. According to Herodotus, perfume making was a high art form in Egypt, with certain concoctions reserved for royalty and the gods. The Greeks, in awe of Egyptian craftsmanship, quickly adopted many of these practices, blending their own ideas with the knowledge they had gained. Historians still argue about the exact influence of Egypt on early Greek perfumery. Some say the Greeks simply borrowed the basics of Egyptian perfume making, while others suggest that they took it much further, innovating new techniques of distillation and blending. But one thing is clear: Greek perfumers inspired by Egyptian methods soon developed their own distinctive fragrances. By the time the Romans came into power, the art of perfumery had traveled west, and Roman emperors like Nero and Augustus were known for their obsession with exotic scents. The Romans even had public bathhouses where they would indulge in the luxury of scented oils, making it a part of their daily routine. But it wasn't just the Western world that felt Egypt's fragrant influence. The ancient Egyptians were also actively trading their perfumes with civilizations in the East, such as Persia and India. In fact, the Silk Road, a network of trade routes that stretched from China to the Mediterranean, carried not only silks and spices, but also precious oils and perfumes. It's fascinating to think that the same fragrances enjoyed by Egyptian royalty would later find their way into the homes and rituals of other cultures across the world. By the time perfume making reached the Persians, the art form had already undergone several centuries of refinement. The Persian Empire, with its vast territory and sophisticated court culture, developed its own perfume traditions, often using ingredients that were not found in Egypt, such as rose and orange blossom. As perfume-making techniques continued to evolve across the Middle East, they influenced both the Byzantine and Ottoman empires, which would later become known for their own rich traditions of fragrance. If we fast forward to the Renaissance, we see that Egypt's fragrant legacy was still alive and well. Renaissance Europe, with its growing interest in classical antiquity, rediscovered the art of perfume making, reviving techniques from ancient Greece and Rome. The perfume industry exploded in France during the 17th and 18th centuries, driven by the luxury of the royal courts. But even here, the roots of the perfume industry can be traced back to the ancient Egyptians. Perfume making during this period was a highly specialized art requiring expert knowledge of distillation and blending skills that Egyptian perfumers had perfected long before anyone in Europe had ever heard of fragrance. Of course, As we all know, the modern perfume industry is a multi-billion-dollar global enterprise with countless brands and fragrances to choose from. While the industry has advanced tremendously over the centuries, thanks to breakthroughs in chemistry and technology, its origins can still be found in the ancient world, particularly in Egypt. Whether it's the heady mystical aroma of myrrh, the fresh notes of lotus and jasmine, or the rich and resinous scent of frankincense, the perfumes of ancient Egypt continue to resonate in the fragrances we wear today. But beyond the bottles and the formulas, what is it that makes ancient Egyptian perfume so captivating to us even after thousands of years? Perhaps it's the sense of mystery and ritual that still lingers in the air whenever we catch a whiff of a long-forgotten scent. When you inhale the fragrance of frankincense or sandalwood, it's as if you're being transported to another time and place, a time when Egypt ruled the world and perfume was both a luxury and a lifeline. Perfume's enduring connection to Egypt is more than just about fragrance. It's about culture, about how one civilization's customs and rituals can echo through the ages and continue to shape the world. It's about the way that ancient Egyptians, in their infinite wisdom, understood the power of scent, not just to enhance beauty, but to connect to the divine, to heal, to protect, and to transform. Historians still wonder how it was that such a seemingly simple concept, a bottle of perfume, could evolve into something so rich and meaningful over the course of millennia. How did the Egyptians, with their limited resources, manage to perfect the art of scent making to such an extent that it would influence future civilizations for centuries to come? It's one of those questions that may never have a definitive answer, but the legacy of their knowledge lives on in every bottle of fragrance we encounter today. As we slowly close the chapter on the fascinating journey of ancient Egyptian perfumes, let's reflect on how something as simple as scent connects us across time and space. From the tombs of Egypt to the bustling streets of Paris, from the temples of Greece to the bazaars of Persia, perfume has always been more than just a product. It's a story. It's a story that began in ancient Egypt, where the art of fragrance was born, and continues to captivate us thousands of years later in ways we may never fully understand. As the last fragrant notes of ancient Egypt's perfume story gently fade into the distance, we take a moment to reflect on everything we've learned. From humble beginnings as practical solutions to heat and hygiene, to their sacred role in religious rituals, to their later influence on cultures far beyond Egypt's borders, the legacy of Egyptian perfumes is richer and far more complex than most of us could have imagined. Yet this history is not merely an ancient relic. It lives on in the perfumes we use today and the ways we, too, associate fragrance with emotion, memory, and even divinity. Now imagine yourself again in the bustling streets of ancient Thebes or Luxor. The desert heat hums in the background, and as you walk past the temple gates, the air is thick with the soothing fragrance of frankincense and myrrh. You catch a faint scent of lotus jasmine and the fresh sweetness of honey. Perhaps you pause for a moment to reflect, or perhaps you're just admiring the intricate beauty of your surroundings. The perfume that swirls around you is not just a luxury, it's a connection to the gods, to history, and to the eternal. What makes the ancient Egyptian perfume industry so captivating is its intimacy with daily life. It wasn't just a commodity, it was a bridge between the mortal and the divine, a way to speak to the gods and gain their favor. Imagine how in those ancient times, each bottle of perfume carried with it not just the scent of nature, but also a deep spiritual purpose. Whether it was used in life's most sacred moments, weddings, births, religious rituals, or in death to help the soul transition to the afterlife, perfume was as much a tool for personal connection as it was for social ritual. Every scent told a story. But here's the thing. These stories don't just exist in history books or archaeological digs. They continue to influence us today. While modern perfumers may have access to advanced techniques and synthetic ingredients, they are still working within a tradition that stretches back millennia. When you walk into a perfume shop today, you might catch a glimpse of a familiar ingredient, jasmine, rose, sandalwood fragrances that in one way or another trace their roots back to the ancient Egyptians. And just as the Egyptians saw perfumes as a way to connect to something greater, we too use fragrance to shape our worlds. When you apply perfume, you are participating in an ancient practice of enhancing your own story. Whether it's the refreshing spritz of citrus to start your day, the warm embrace of vanilla to unwind in the evening, or the mystical allure of frankincense to center your spirit, perfume continues to be much more than a pleasant scent. It's part of who we are, and it's part of how we move through life. As we close this chapter, think about how, in your own life, fragrance has played a role. Perhaps it reminds you of a special moment, a place, or a person. Maybe you use perfume to evoke a feeling or set a mood. In this way, we are all still, in a way, participating in the ancient Egyptian practice of using scent to connect the mundane to the divine. And as you drift off tonight, with the soft hum of the world outside and the comforting scent of your surroundings, remember that the same scents that filled the air of the pharaoh's courts are still with us, connecting us to their world in ways we may never fully understand. Their wisdom, their rituals, and their appreciation for beauty, all wrapped in the rich, heady fragrance of oils and resins, continue to linger in the very air we breathe. Now slow your breathing. Let the soft sounds of the night carry you away, just as the perfume carried the ancient Egyptians into eternity. As your mind drifts towards sleep, you might find yourself floating in the scent of history, where time melts away, and all that remains is the warmth and serenity of those distant fragrant days.